Welcome to Wrestling with God. It's our weekly series that we decided that we would do hopefully every Sunday. This is officially our first Sunday of the new year. To all of you, Happy New Year. We're here at the Twisted Wrestling Studios, and we just want to encourage you to hang in there with me if you have any interest at all in the things of the Lord or the things of the kingdom. This might be at least a place that you can come in and take a look-see and maybe consider. In here in the studios, obviously, we have our own chairs now, and this will be up to you guys. I mean, if we're usually taping late Sunday mornings, and if you have any interest whatsoever and you're in the area, I don't think it would be out of the realm of possibility to have a few guests. Sometimes just talking to a camera is a little bit different than maybe pulling off of, off of actually real for life people. But needless to say, that's something that we can take a step at a time. And interesting times we're in right now. Interesting times. So let's go ahead and pick up where we left off. We were talking about the story of Job. We were talking about his the compact that was made between Satan and God. We discussed the loss that occurred, and we also want to talk about, for those of you that know the story, we want to talk about the restoration that actually occurred. But I would like to propose some ideas for you, or at least some thoughts that you could take and do with what you want with them. But if you remember, we sort of ended up with Job's wife, and many of the religious stories that have surrounded that, we have always attributed Job's wife, when she encouraged him, for the lack of a better term, to curse God and die. And all we could see from that point forward is that you were mad at her, God was mad at her, and I can guarantee you still might be mad at her, but I'm not mad at her, and God's not mad at her. If you had lost and watched your husband and all the children, the devastation that occurred, I don't think it would be far-fetched to have someone be so torn up and devastated by the loss. You know, I think we gloss over a lot of these stories, and they just become religious stories that really don't mean much. You know, one of the things that the Lord said to the accepted religious society of that day was, it's by your traditions that you make the word of God of no effect. And what he was basically saying to them is, until tradition gets put, it doesn't have to go away. Traditions, going to church, giving of your tithes and offering, meeting together, fellowshipping together, I get all that, and that's important. But what's more important is that the things that the Lord said, that we actually make them paramount in our life. And so here Job is literally, for the lack of a better term, he's experiencing his own hell. Now, many of you, with where our society is today, we have a glut of social media. We have, I think it was Joel where it said, there's multitudes in the valley of decision. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of things going through, a lot of things we're experiencing. And I know there's a question with many of you, if there actually is a heaven, and if you believe there's actually a hell. If you recall when I was sharing the last week, or maybe the week before that, I had a Bible student who asked if I believed there was a literal heaven. And my question was, well, do you mean that if we're going to believe in a literal heaven, then you ought to be able to get, right, in a rocket ship and eventually get there. And we've pretty much, hopefully we've agreed that we can't do that, although Elon Musk is pretty resourceful. Maybe he can find out for us and build one, put enough fuel in the thing to see if he can make it to heaven. Not that we're wanting to send him there. He has a place, just like all of us have a place and a purpose. So let's talk about heaven and hell for a moment. Here's my take. If I was to make a case for heaven and hell, then I have to base it upon the prayer that the Lord made when he taught us to pray. He says, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven." So we have a principle here that we may be able to see some things, although they may have been prostituted and perverted from its original intent and purpose with creation, that we still might be able to glean some things, that we might be able to ascertain if there is a heaven and if there is a hell. And someone would say, what, you're not sure? Well, I mean, no one actually knows, right? We're not talking about what you believe, but when it's all said and done, other than what we know from the scriptures, and I believe them, but there are those that probably because of our example or lack of one, the last thing that we would ever witness is that there's a heaven, because most of our lives, even those of us who call ourselves believers, they don't emulate heaven, it sort of emulates hell. But Job, in his particular situation, was going through a type of hell. So I'm going to make a case for heaven and hell based upon let your kingdom come, let your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So here's my question. Why do we have prisons in our country? Anybody want to take a guess? Why do we have prisons? Why do we have jails? Well, what we have prisons to be able to contain those who have a propensity to want to injure one another. I'm not talking about first-time offenders. We don't have to get into the doctrine of our penal system, but for the lack of argument right now, there are those, and I'm sure you know some, who their rule of thumb, their propensity is to want to injure others, whether it's burglaries, assaults, murders, thefts. And so look, if we have a place to place these people, then if there is another side, and if there is a life beyond what we can see and feel and taste and hear with our five physical senses, then I'm going to say at the minimum, hell has to be there. It has to be considered that it exists, because, you know, when you leave this body, it's not like, you know, you leave in stages of a rocket ship where all of a sudden, if you think you're going to heaven, then the rocket ship, once it goes into the air, and you're going to have the separation of the, of the jettison and the propulsion and the pieces of the rocket ship, and then all that's good is going to go into heaven, or vice versa, all that's bad is going to go into hell. But as a rule, what people practice in life, and what they develop in life, and what they choose in life, and what they confirm in life, if they have a propensity to want to injure others, then I'm going to say that we have to have a place, if there is a other side, to be able to house them. Now, we can talk about in just a moment what that is, what I think it is, but I'm going to tell you, ultimately, we still really don't know. Now, argue about it, we can fuss about it. Right now, let's just leave it on the table for a little bit and see if it does anything for us. And if there's a heaven, at the minimum, there has to be a boundary between both. We know even in the story about Lazarus, who had he was laid outside the gates of the rich man who was fared sumptuously in fine purple and linen. And Lazarus ended up, when he passed away, when he died, he was in heaven. The rich young ruler who had all of his doctrine, life, purpose, avarice, he ended up in hell. And so even Abraham came to him in the story, says there's a great gulf fixed between heaven and hell, where one can't, for the lack of a better term, where heaven, by its very pureness, its holiness, and its existence, it can't torment hell. Because holiness around hellishness is a torment. And then, of course, because the very nature of hell, that propensity, is to want to assault heaven. It wants to destroy. One of the biggest things with the problem with those that desire to hurt children, and I think you know what I'm talking about. Those that desire to, we talk about some of these horrible spirits that want to assault children in ways that I think you'll follow me right now. The reason is because evil abhors innocence. And what could be more innocent than a little child? And what could be more evil than someone that wants to harm a little child? So again, that particular personality, aside of the logistics of what heaven and hell is, we need to have them cordoned off. There needs to be a boundary so they can no longer assault the heaven, the innocence. And of course, you have to keep in mind that heaven exists in its glory and wonder and holiness and beauty. The mere fact that exists is a torment to hell. Just real quick, we're not going to keep you long today, but if you were a family that believed and you found somebody out on the street that ingratiated themselves to you, and you invited them over for Thanksgiving dinner, and let's say the desire and the propensity of this person was to actually get in there, have a meal with you, and case the home and come back and steal everything you had. Now, during that time, especially if you were a genuine believer, you wanted to help, I want you to picture the family around this Thanksgiving dinner, the prayer that goes forth, everybody enjoying and fellowship and getting along with one another. That's what happens in your household, right? On Thanksgiving, you get along with one another. You don't argue about politics. You don't argue about religion. You don't fuss. Yeah, maybe this is the wrong message for that. But because you do, and there's a reason that you do, there's still a little bit of hell in you that you haven't got out. I'm going to suggest you get that out before you leave this body, just in case. So during that time, you're maybe having a little song with one another, praying around the table. And you must understand what that would feel like to someone in your home if you just brought them on that has intentions to do you harm. And the last thing they want to do is be around that. That's what I'm talking about, that hell torments heaven, torments hell, and hell assaults heaven. So if that's the case, and we're going to take that into consideration, let's talk about then who governs hell. Now, we always hear, especially from, those that glory in, wanting to go to hell. Oh, we're going to be partying with our friends. I can't wait to go there. Well, I don't know if that's exactly what what it may be like, just in case. Oh yeah, I can't wait to meet so-and-so up there. You know, if there's a rock and roll heaven, we know there's got to be a hell of a band, but I think if there's a rock and roll hell, I'm going to guess it's probably not what you think from this standpoint. Because let's talk about who governs hell. And I can tell you right now that God does. The devil doesn't. He's got no power. It's been stripped from him. And it even goes farther than that, because this is going to possibly, since this is the Twisted Wrestling Studios, possibly twist a little bit in light of your perceived doctrine. In Psalm 139, I think it's verses 7 and 8, especially those of you who are the literalists out there that, you know, want to believe everything literal. It says, if I ascend, this is the psalmist David, he says, if I ascend into heaven, you were there. Ready for this? You can look it up. Psalm 139, verses 7 and 8. It says, but if I make my bed in hell, it says you're there. And years ago I looked at that and says, what? Who? Huh? What? Huh? Huh? If I make my bed in hell, you're there? Well, that doesn't line up with Dante's Inferno, the Divine Comedies, the poems Milton's Paradise Lost. You know, more of our tradition, I think, is with those Divine Comedies, that the majority of them, you know, won't line up with Scripture, than they are truth. And so I want you to think about this for a minute. How can God be there with you? Oh, well, that's just, you know, that's an allegory. Oh, well, that's an allegory? Well, what other things in the Scriptures then can be an allegory? Which actually they are, but we're talking about substance here. And here's what my take is about those who go to hell. Many of you that right now that have a propensity to want to harm people, you know that could change. It won't be easy, especially if you're older now and you've confirmed yourself in this evil. But pretty much the hell you're going through right now isn't going to be a whole lot different what it's like if you go to hell. I'm sure it's going to be magnified. You know, we talk about hellfire and brimstone and torment. Look, you're in torment now. You're going through hell now. I mean, many of you wake up wanting to harm people and lash out, and you go to bed that way. But conversely, and those of us who do falter and do have some experiences of mistakes, as it were, and because we still are dealing with a fallen nature, you need to recognize that that particular nature will potentially be accepted into heaven as well. But back to the thing about hell, I want to tell you how much God loves you, and even those that can't wait to go or think they're going to hell. Not only does he love you, and not only does he have you covered, his love will never stop loving you if you leave this body and you end up in hell. And here's how I think it's going to work based upon this. If I ascend into heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in hell, you're there. The Lord will accommodate whatever choice you have, and he loves you so much, he'll even try to soften your fall as you decide to dive headlong into hell like a maniac with all kinds of avarice and evil and greed. It won't change his love toward you. And even in that, if you decide you're going to make your bed in hell, friends, Satan doesn't govern hell. He doesn't govern anything. God governs hell. And there's an order there, even though its order is much of a disorder. So that's something for you to think about, and that is something for you to ponder, and you can determine that I'm making a case for both, that if we're going to have a heaven and a hell, there has to be, if there's a life after death, a place where we put those who have a propensity and a desire to injure, and for those that have a desire to do good, even though much good isn't to be found in us sometimes, and you look unto the Lord and you want him to be your help and your provider. Even as Job is a good man, but he went through hell. Job is filled with so many great stories. In Job 41, traditionally in Job chapter 41, there is a story about a Leviathan. And just like many of the Bible studies over the years that I was raised in, where they used to talk about, is it okay to have a glass of wine? You notice how much that's changed now with all believers, and I've never necessarily had a problem myself, but that was the taboo thing, and now it's like, you know, they're probably serving wine at Bible studies. So as long as it's a Merlot, then I'm okay. So this Leviathan, and I'll quickly try to get into this. It says, can you draw out Leviathan with a hook, or snare his tongue with a line which you lower? This is Job 41. Can you put a reed through his nose? Or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many supplications to you? Will he speak softly to you? Will he make a covenant with you? Will you take him as a servant? Will you play with him as with a bird, or will you leash him for your maidens? Will your companions make a banquet? Can you fill his skin with harpoons? It's saying you can't even pierce this skin with a harpoon, or his head with fishing spears. Now listen to this. Verse 8, lay your hand on him, you'll remember the battle, and you'll never do it again. And we have fussed for years about, well, you know, the Bible talks about sea monsters. It isn't about sea monsters. You're going to have to help me here. It's been a while since I've shared a lot of the things that have been within me. But look, here's what it is. The Leviathan in the original Hebrew is defined as a joining with Babylon. The Leviathan in the original language is defined as a joining with Babylon. And Babylon represents all that's not good. And this Leviathan in Job, all there's many things that we can glean from Job. This Leviathan is a representation of a hardened heart. And that's where some of our hearts are. They become hardened against one another. No? They become hardened against their husbands or wives, hardened against their friends. They had falling out, hardened against the Lord. And if you go back and read this about its jaws are clenched, its teeth is clenched, you couldn't pierce its scales with a spear. Well, that's the very definition of someone that's closed off, locked out, teeth clenched. You're not going to reach them. And sometimes it's happened not by their fault, and sometimes it's happened because we just choose to have a hard heart. And when we begin to talk about things like this, we need to understand that there are spiritual values that we're going to be sharing moving forward that I think we might be able to have you walk away from each week. And even if it's one thought, that you might be able to learn from. So I'm going to close with this, and I'm actually going to close. In Job chapter 42, after all of this hell that occurred, God approaches Job. He approaches his three friends, and they weren't really friends. They were pretty much his accusers. They kept, like all of us, everybody wants to say what somebody needs. Everybody wants to criticize one another. They want to tell, let me tell you something. If changing somebody was by telling them what's wrong with them, the whole world would change. Because get on social media, you're probably on it listening to me, but after you leave me, get on social media, and you're going to see everybody telling everyone else, including who's the best wrestler and who's not, what's wrong with them. And if changing someone was just being able to tell them what's wrong with them, then the whole world will be changed, because we love telling everybody what they need, except when it comes to us. So Job gets on the comforters. God gets on the comforters. He says to Job and the friends, where were you? You're going to question me, what you're going through, what Job went through? Where were you when I set the world in expanse? Where were you when I separated the waters? And as Job chapter 42 comes to a close, it said that Job's captivity, we talked about the compact, we talked about the loss, and we talked about the restoration. And it said when Job, his captivity was turned when he prayed for his friends. How's that, folks? You going through some tough times right now? You have somebody that you think it's their fault you're in the position they're in? You ever thought about forgiving them? You ever thought about praying for them? It said Job's captivity was turned when he prayed for his friends. And it said that he got everything back and twice as much. So we've heard the messages over all these years that if you're going through what Job went through and you trust the Lord and you come through it, God's going to give you double. And everybody out in the audience, out in the congregation say, I'm getting double, I'm getting double. Folks, how many lobster dinners can you eat? How many cars can you drive? Who cares about the double? It's the principle that got him there and got him out. And what do we focus on? That Job's wife is a negative influence and that we're going to be rich and wealthy and famous, and there's nothing wrong with having some things, but there's something wrong with things having you. So, in verse 16, it's the last verse of Job. It says, after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and grandchildren for 4 generations. And I love the last verse. In verse 17, it says, so Job died old and full of days. You want to die old? I want to die old and full of days. Have you been through some tough times? You've been through some horrible circumstances? I can tell you I have. But you hang in there. Wrestling with God is here to not talk about how we're going to fight with God. Stop it. Stop at the nonsense and the foolishness. We're not fighting with God. The fight that's occurring is with yourself. And if you were to go back and talk about Jacob's ladder and how he struggled with God and came out with a limp. No, anytime you struggle with that unregenerate nature within you, in essence, when the purity of heaven begins to torment some of those areas in your life, and this would be the time to change it, you can begin to make those adjustments and ask God for help. At the minimum, you can go away with saying, God, would you help me? I've told my son several times over the years, I don't care what you're in the midst of or how bad you think the situation you're in, never feel guilty enough or bad enough to not ask God for help. So, I want to die old. I want to die full of days. I want you to die old because you're going to die. And you don't want to take a chance that there is what you're saying you don't believe in. But look, we can get into that next week. Let's die old. Let's die full of days. This is Joseph Sarracino, Wrestling with God at the Twisted Wrestling Studios. Talk to you soon.